Welcome into Rick and Bubba University. We got a brand new episode today, and Bubba, we're gonna delve into the world of education today. All you hear every time you hear people getting up and talking, and we got elections coming up. Education. We're going to kind of delve into the world of education and ask some questions. Where do these textbooks come from? Are there other alternatives out there to try to make sure that we want our children or whoever's being educated to actually be educated in the right way? And today we're going to talk about the world of textbooks, and we're going to tell you about an organization that's putting together textbooks that I wish I had access to when I was coming through. So before we do that, though, I want to ask you this question. Now, you know about the VPN stuff, right, Bubba? A VPN protects your privacy and security online. You know about all that.
You need that.
But did you know this? And I didn't know this till recently, and it's taken my TV watching to another level. Did you know you can use a VPN to unlock movies and shows that are only available in other countries?
Really?
You know how we have to wait?
No, I didn't know that.
We have to wait for it to come here. So it's called ExpressVPN. Let's say you're going to sit down, you were going to binge watch, I don't know what, Doctor Who. It's one of these series, but it's in the UK. So all you do is you just fire up the ExpressVPN app, change your location from the United States to the UK, refresh Netflix, and that's it. And then ExpressVPN hides your IP address and lets you control, who you want, where you want, and you're telling sites that you're located somewhere that you really aren't. You can choose from almost 100 different countries. So think about all the Netflix libraries that could be available to you.
Wow.
If you're able to change your location. So you just use ExpressVPN to access, Japanese Netflix, whatever you want to do. And it's also available not just for Netflix. ExpressVPN works with any streaming service, Hulu, BBC, iPlayer, YouTube, you name it. There's hundreds of VPNs out there. But the reason that we want to tell you about ExpressVPN is that you can watch really, really fast. There's never any buffering or lag, and you can stream in HD, not a problem. ExpressVPN is also compatible with all your devices. You can watch it on your phone, media consoles, smart TVs, and more. So you can watch what you want to watch on the go or on the big screen, wherever you are. So go to our special link right now, expressvpn.com/RickBubba. expressvpn.com/RickBubba, and get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. Support the show, watch what you want, and protect yourself. expressvpn.com/RickBubba. Well, Bubba, let's say hello to Dr. Paul Cleveland.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good.
Dr. Cleveland, thank you for joining us. And, Rick, when you do a show like we do, we have to have a vast network of experts that are behind the scene, behind the curtains, that we rely on for information. And we don't often pull that curtain back and show you those people. But one of those people we count on when it comes to economics is Dr. Paul Cleveland. Yep. Now, that may sink you out there in the world, Dr. Cleveland, but thank you for being here today.
Well, I'm so glad to be here, and hopefully we can have a good discussion here about education. And
it's nice to talk to a fellow professor. We're professors at Rick and Bubba University, and today we talked to Paul Cleveland. You're a professor of finance at Birmingham Southern.
At Birmingham Southern. I've taught economics there as well over the years. In fact, my area is probably political economy. It's what I write most about. So,
boy, I'll tell you one thing: we better educate the American people on that, and I'm talking about fast.
No doubt about that.
Do you sit back sometimes, honestly, and let's being serious for a moment, and we'll be serious, during this podcast.
Some of it,
knowing what you know, and the fact that you have been educated on how the economy is set up, how it works. Do you look right now at our country and hear terms being thrown around like socialism and capitalism and democracy and constitutional republic and the Fed and how taxes work, how the government works? And do you find yourself thinking we are grotesquely uneducated on how the economy actually works?
That's pretty much my average day. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know that you because Bubba and I've talked about this before in history. I think one of the biggest turning points for our education system was when we allowed something that our founding fathers would have never allowed, and that was the creation of the Department of Education.
Oh, clearly. There's absolutely no need for it. In fact, I'm not even sure why we didn't have a state Department of Education, to be honest. Those decisions ought to be made at best at the community level, and I would think more reasonably
at the institution
level between parents and the institutions, and because parents know their children and they know what their children need, and they'll know how what will work best for their own children. And it could be that different institutions might be best for different kids.
Well, too, it was sold to us, Rick, that it was just going to be an umbrella organization to help out, to bring continuity, and now it has turned into a dictatorial curriculum advisory panel that holds people hostage, and therein is the mistake.
Well, we talk about economics. We'll land there first. There's other things because I know you deal with history too, which is another thing that has been terrifying to watch the attempt to be revisionist when it comes to American history. But when the Department of Education came along, Ronald Reagan taught us some of the scariest words on the planet. I'm with the government. I'm here to help. But we were sold that they would never. Here comes our word, Bubba, that we love. They would never get involved with curriculum. That's what we were told.
Right.
All they were here to do is to try to get the educational systems federal money so they can fund the different educational institutions.
But their term was umbrella.
We will never be involved in curriculum and never be involved in anything. And what I think terrifies a lot of people, watching or listening to this podcast, is that the government schools, and some people when we say that but that's really accurate.
No, that is accurate. That is what they are, and most people really don't even know where they came from. I've sort of traced that over in some of my books. In fact, one of the reasons I wrote my first kind of popular book, Unmasking the Sacred Lies, was for this reason, to try to educate people as to how the government got its foot in the door and then began to expand in every area of our lives.
I bet you're popular at the staff meetings, aren't you?
Well, it used to be that, my colleagues at Birmingham Southern would want to debate, but that sort of ceased in recent years.
Well, and I think, too, anytime you have a discussion about education, just like anything else, that you're trying to make it better.
Right.
People who are in that industry get offended, and you can have a lot of very good and devoted classroom teachers and still have a problem with education.
Right.
And I think that's where we're at, because I think a lot of times the people who are really doing the teaching and working very hard and a lot of times spending their own money to make a classroom, they get offended when we start talking about this, but we're not pointing to them. We're talking about a bigger, sometimes more sinister plan that's in play.
Yeah, but mostly the problems I see are at the level of administration. We create the Ministry of Administration to administer the administrators. And, therein lies the problem that oftentimes what happens is the teacher's hands tend to be tied, and they can't really accomplish the things that they would like to accomplish in the classroom. And a lot of the best teachers just get frustrated and end up bowing out at some point. I see that happening far more often.
Oh, yeah. You get to the point where you don't want to be part of it anymore because you see not just where it's headed, what it's become.
Exactly.
And so take us back a little bit. You said you tried to educate people. Educate us a little bit. How did we end up with government schools?
It's really kind of a fascinating question because what happened was the common school movement began in the state of Massachusetts, kind of the mid-19th century. And even there, they had some precursors to that. So by 1805, 1809, the Unitarians had taken over Harvard. And their interest,
explain Unitarians.
All right,
break that down.
It's sort of a view of God that says that God is, and we like the moral code, but we don't like the Christian ideas. In other words, I don't like the doctrine of original sin. I don't like the fact that God says that I'm a sinner in need of salvation. So what they were doing is they were rejecting that, and so Unitarianism is universalism, that everybody is going to be saved. And so in their view, the biggest problem of evil in the world has to do with education. Okay, not that were
right.
fundamentally flawed and immoral and sinful. So in essence, what they wanted to do at the time, it was the churches, Christian churches, owned education.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at all the ways students were trained, that's what it was. Well, the scholars at Harvard didn't like that. And so what they were beginning to do is, how can we change this? They sent a couple of young scholars to it was Germany, but Prussia at the time, to look at their common school efforts. And they came back with new ideas. And if you read their letters to each other, that's what they did. If you know the name Horace Mann, he was their first bureaucrat, education bureaucrat. And so his success at that point began this whole process where more and more states got involved. And it's interesting, too, because they were aided and abetted by some of the first community organizers, and they turned out to be the Owenites. I don't know if you know who Robert Owen is.
No, I don't.
But
no.
he was Robert Owen was a communist. He was advocating for communism, but he was also an industrialist in Scotland. And he thought, well, communism's the way of the future. And so he tried to set up his factory in a communist environment.
But that worked well.
Oh, it was a failure.
You know what? I didn't have to know who he was. Yes,
no, you did. Your common sense will tell you.
I got that one. I can pass that test.
Yeah. Right. So they sent his sons to the U.S. and their thought was this: well, we're trying to deal with people who are already jaded. They're adults. They're already jaded. We need people who are on board with our plan. So they got some elitists, some scholars, and they set out and they founded New Harmony, Indiana, as their prototypical model of how communism will work. Well, I think it failed within the year.
Sure.
Right.
As you
about one business cycle.
Yeah, right, yeah.
And their conclusion was not that communism was bad, but, well, we're starting with adults. And what we got to do is we have to go back, and we got to start with babies, and teach them the right way. So they became the community organizers helping to push the common school movement, and it moved from state to state to state. Eventually, you get these public schools with mandatory attendance laws. Compulsory attendance comes.
Oh yeah,
it's almost like a re-education camp, isn't
It
it?
is. So
no, seriously, that's what we're all thinking. You wonder if that mindset is exaggerated, and it sounds like if you know the true history, no, it's not.
No, because they become indoctrination camps. It's not about education anymore. It's about whatever the political class wants it to be about. It might be about we're just going to make everybody a good American citizen, however we define that.
Right.
And, along comes John Dewey and begins to institutionalize this in a new way. And so now we're kind of off to the races bit by bit, going down a particular road.
And then we end up with New Jersey, mandating that their government schools teach children gay and lesbian history, what it means to be gay, all of this within a government school.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's what's happening now.
Sure.
So if there's anything that we want to try to change the culture on, we just funnel it through the government schools.
That's right. And not just the school system, but this is also can be done through media.
Sure.
I would refer
Courts,
to it as kind of the transformation industry out there, which would include the schools, the media, and most everything else that you see.
And that's interesting because I think as people who have more conservative values, we have made inroads in some places. Education is not one. But based on what you're saying, it basically was set up to spread a communistic view of the world, and they've been somewhat successful in that.
Right.
It took a while, but look at the Democrats right now.
While some of those at Harvard were probably not given to the socialism or the communism to begin with,
but they didn't.
Boy, it's that way today.
Yeah.
You can't go on Harvard's campus and as a free enterprise kind of guy. You're not.
No,
You're
but they certainly started out, even if it wasn't what we're talking about, the Unitarianism. They did want to start out and say we need to change the dynamic of the view of
God,
of religion,
exactly,
and all of that. And then of course now it's whatever you want to change, almost like you just put it through the system and send it through the government schools. I mean, we laugh all the time being followers of Jesus, that we're saving all this money and putting together all these accounts to fund the college education of our Christian children so they can go to a place that'll spend 4 years trying to turn them away from it.
Yeah, and that's true, because it's, even if you're a Christian, you can succumb to it. I've met a lot of Christian faculty who don't really understand their biblical worldview should have an impact upon how they pursue their studies of their discipline.
Right.
And so
instead it goes the other way.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's difficult to do because some of the underlying determinism that's embedded in atheism is implicit. It's not taught. I mean, it's not, even if you get a PhD, you might not know the philosophical underpinnings of all of this. Which was a question for me. I was sharing with Rick earlier that I grew up in a Christian home and went away to college, and I kind of got out there.
Right.
So when I came back in graduate school to, my Christian faith was central, I realized I couldn't be an economist pursuing my discipline in a way that wasn't consistent with my Christian worldview.
Right.
Yeah.
So that changed.
Are we ready? Because I know ultimately we want to let people know about what you do involving textbooks and who they're available for and all of that. But it seems to me that there is a portion of our country, thankfully, that is starting to get to the point where they said enough. I remember, and I openly admit this, I remember the first time a homeschool kid was a big fan of the show. And it wasn't that long ago. And I remember kind of having some fun and making light of homeschool. I thought, we said, what prom do you go to? Ha, ha, ha. How do y'all handle homecoming games? And ha, ha, ha. And at the time, I really thought, why would anyone homeschool? Because your first concern is that the person won't have
social skills,
healthy social skills, and they should interact with other people. And I certainly realize now that the homeschool organizations do those kind of things now.
Yeah.
But in the beginning,
it was some satirical comedy of a limited view we had of it.
I remember vividly thinking to myself when I was growing up in Calhoun County, I will never put my kid in a private school. All these private school kids are, they're a bunch of snotty nose. As soon as they come out of the Christian schools, they go out and raise all kinds of Cain, and they're not in the real world. And I remember I had those views.
Right.
Until I came to where we live now, and I was on the kids that have just gone off to college. And Bubba, you remember this too, because the same thing was said to you. And we were talking to somebody about one of the Christian schools in Birmingham. I said, I'm not going to send my kid to a Christian school. I just,
just private school.
Yeah, private school, man.
Didn't appeal to me.
We didn't like the private school kids. We were growing up, and they ain't the real world, all this. And then he said to us, no, what you don't understand is the Christian private school of today, in general, I'm sure there's exceptions, in general, is the public school that you attended.
That's correct.
And
that can be very correct.
And I was like, what? And the more I realized it, watching my kids go through this school, these were things that you didn't need to go to a Christian private school when I was growing up. They prayed before school started. Everybody stood up and pledged to the American flag. We had
sung the state song.
Yeah, you would have a teacher in a government school that would sit there on Good Friday,
tell you the story.
Read
it right out of the Bible
of Jesus and the crucifixion. Would refer to fundamental Christian beliefs in the founding fathers and American history. And then I realized when my kids got into school, that was over.
Oh yeah.
If you were in a government school, that government school had to be deemed godless. Or they face trouble from the old Department of Education that would cut the funding off. And if you want our funding, you got to play our game. And I thought to myself, wow, there is going to be a boon for Christian private schools and homeschooling, and it's happening. I mean, they're driving people into these different ways to educate their children because they're thinking, if I've got choices and you're going to talk about some today.
Yeah.
If I have choices, I'm going to take them.
Well, that's true. I mean, what has happened, and you see this in all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. When the government centralizes control, they play this extortion game.
Right.
And so once they have your money, then they're kind of dictating to you how you're going to do these things, and particularly in education. And therein lies really the problem that we face. How do you instruct people when they're continuing to write out of history important facts? And, history is history, and there's good, the bad, and the ugly.
Sure there is.
And
we need to know it all.
No, that's true. and we need to teach the good, the bad, and the ugly, because the whole point of history is to dig out of there what are the hard and fast principles
to get
life.
better. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And what are the things we don't want to do again, and what are the things that we do want to do? What are the things that really did work well and that we need to embrace and carry on with?
So tell us what you've been doing, because I think we presented the problem. Okay. And then when you get to the problem, you start looking for solutions. And if you're going to indoctrinate people to a worldview, then the textbooks that they're being given have to also be altered. And so someone says, well, where's a resource for me to educate my children? I'm not a teacher. I'm in an organization. I'm getting together. Or, hey, I'm a private school. We just started a private school. I know even the private school that our kids attended, they've used some of your textbooks.
Right.
They start thinking, well, we can have the best of ideas, but where's our curriculum? Where's our textbooks? There's not that many.
There really are not that many. And so, I had a mentor, Dr. Carson, and he was a historian by training. And he had ended up leaving the academy and beginning to work on a project that he had, which was to flesh out high school history and social science. And so he developed a 6-volume American history set that are paperbacks. He also wrote an economics text, and one of the last books he wrote was American Government. He wanted to get a Western civilization text, and he was aging, and he didn't want to do it. And I knew him at the time, and as he mentored me, and so he got me to write it. So that was actually my first book.
That's one of the beauties of mentees.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, he's a great scholar. He really took me head and shoulders above where I was at the time. So anyway, I got to the point where I had the manuscript and we were ready to go on publication. And he came to me and said, "Paul, I think you need to find another publisher." that was kind of rough news. And anyway, I had a counselor at the time who said, well, I was sharing that with him, and he said, well, Paul, why don't you publish it? Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I have an example here. Dr. Carson, that's what he was doing. Yeah. And I know why he told me that at the time. His health was failing. He was going to pass away in 2003. And so we pressed ahead and we did it. And so my first book, I titled it "Understanding the Modern Culture Wars," and we did pretty well with it. And they're using it at the private Christian school you mentioned. Yeah. So it did well, and so I wrote my second book. I'm an economic historian, so Unmasking the Sacred Lies. That book I wrote for a popular audience. Yeah. I would say it's an economic history of public policy in America is what it is.
By the way, and I don't that is an invaluable source because I think economically, we're Rick included. Sometimes we are just completely uninformed of the history of all the different policies that have failed miserably, and why they failed based on economics.
Sure, and then once they failed, they began to pass a new program to fix the failure that creates a new failure. Yeah. So it's this sort of spiraling effect.
And boy, we're there now.
We are there. Anyway, fast forward, I always liked his econ book, but it was dated. The Soviet Union still existed.
Right.
And so it had to be updated. So I went to Clearances Heirs, and I asked if I could take that book over, and they went, sure, absolutely. Yeah. So I redid it in a third edition. The way it is now, it's in a fourth. So all of his work was done within a worldview that is consistent with a Christian worldview. That is, he built on a natural law perspective of this world. That, natural law theorists all recognize some created order, and we're trying to discern that order. And for Dr. Carson, as well as for me, that order is designed in by God himself, the Creator.
Right.
And so, finally, all his books have come to be. So I've become an educational entrepreneur, and we're trying to complete his vision by building out online courses, putting the books in a form that's more user-friendly if you're homeschoolers or if they're Christian schools, so that we can interact with teachers and provide them the materials they need to teach these subjects in a consistent fashion. So that's our goal.
Well, and one of the things we touched on when you and I were having lunch to talk about you maybe being on is just like a lot of things, and I want to handle this as kindly as I can because I think there's been improvements, thankfully. I'm so thankful for that. But sometimes we label the thing Christian worldview, or this is Christian this and Christian that, and what we've done is we've taken what the world has already done and we just throw a few Bible verses around it. And one of the things that you and I talked about is sometimes some of these attempts at curriculum for faith-based homeschooling or faith-based Christian schools is a little corny and campy. And what you have done, and some of the stuff that we've looked over, is you have said, no, this is a serious view of the world that can be taken seriously, and there's a lot to learn about it, but it's also extremely well done.
I mean, that's been our goal all along. Is
just like music, we talked about that. Hey, I'm a Christian artist. Yeah, but your song's no good. So if you want to be a Christian artist, that's great. But have good songs, or do a good job. Have some depth to it. And I know that was your approach with these textbooks as well.
It has been. In fact, from the beginning, as I began to pray about working even on the first book and doing the work on it, my goal was, God, help me to just tell the truth.
Right.
Just be a truth teller and do it in a way that is scholarly and in a way that gets to the point. And where people can grasp it.
Let me ask you a question that we're dealing with today, and you even hear it in the debates and everything. There is this really unbelievable draw or drift towards socialism, communism, when the United States has been by far the most successful country in the history of mankind as far as level of living, standard of living, our technological improvements, what we've been able to share with the rest of the planet. If you just look at it on the high ground, you would think, man, the world ought to want to be like us. Now, we have our faults. I'm not saying we're perfect. But I don't understand people who have grown up in our country and have all the things that they have, and somehow they want to drift toward a subpar format, in my opinion. Why is that? What is that, a psychological thing more than an economic thing? What is that?
Well, it's part of the worldview of the kind of the atheism naturalism.
Yeah,
I mean, it really is, because let's think about this. They think they can reach paradise or some kind of utopia,
right,
and wipe out human ills if they can accomplish a particular task. Now, the underlying task they want to accomplish is to eliminate self-interest, which is an impossibility,
right?
Because if you're a human being, you have self-interest.
Correct.
I mean, there's no other way. If you are a thinker,
right,
and you understand you're a person with a will, you have self-interest.
Right.
So their task is an impossible one, but their only tool to accomplish the task is socialism. So it is a religion for them. And as a religion, then they have to use government to accomplish
as a tool,
tool to the end. And so, I mean, think about this: the Soviet Union, when it existed, it created all kinds of model farms, this. They even had, they had elections, but in their elections, I mean, and over 90% of the people voted in their elections
because they were told to.
But there was only one person to vote for.
Or it was Communist 1 or Communist 2.
Right, yeah.
No, there wasn't even that. It was just one person.
We all voted for the only choice we had.
You wonder, well, why do you do this? I mean, why do you do that? Well, everything was a deception. And so you think about, well, who needs to be deceived? Well, everybody. And the people who need to be deceived the most are those who are running the system, because they've got to believe they're, at the end of the day, good people.
No, I saw this, and I can never think of the name, and I'm sorry, Adler, this is not good that I don't remember this, but it's a documentary, and it's a documentary about communist China when they said you can only have one child. And I think it may be called One Child. But anyway, your point, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They're interviewing these people long after it was over, because they discovered there were not enough young people to take care of the old people.
Right.
So then they came back and said, how about 2 kids? But what they bought in completely.
Right.
I mean, they said our government saved our country by limiting us to one child. It was absolutely the right thing to do. And they had all these propaganda shows. They would even come in and do musicals that talked about the wonderment of one child, and we're going to be overpopulated. Our country will be destroyed if you have more than one child. And the people never questioned it. They started being proponents for it, thinking our government was so wise. They were so forward thinking that they saved our country by forcing us into getting rid of babies. If we had more than one, of course, it led to, sadly, babies lying in piles everywhere, because they didn't want to go to jail because they only had one kid, or they had a female and they wanted their one shot to be a male, so they would just abandon female babies in open markets, and sometimes they would just lay there, because if you've talked everybody into it, guess what else happens? Nobody picks her up because they don't want her either.
Right.
And so, but the greater point, I know that's a horrific example, but the greater point is the propaganda did work. They did buy into it.
Well, somewhat.
Yeah.
And but on the other hand, there are a lot of people, when you begin to see it in practice, you don't believe it.
That's correct. But
but what do you do at that point? Have you gone so far you can't back out now? Well, because you've made it part of your fabric, and you're like, uh-oh.
Now the leadership, think about what they do, because it kind of works for them. Right. I mean,
the ruling class.
Yeah, the ruling class, it works for them, and
Sure.
and so they live in isolation. I mean, think about our own political class.
Right.
They call the rest of the world, the rest of America, flyover country, and they live in bubbles.
You're right.
And they so they only meet with, they only talk with each other.
Yeah, inside the Beltway.
So they never hear a different worldview, and they consider everybody else unsophisticated or unable to think through things, and so they've kind of controlled the educational systems in such a way that I refer to it as intellectual incest.
Boy, that paints a picture, doesn't
it? Does. But to your point, you get to the point where you have some that are indoctrinated into it, which I saw in the special. Then the ones who opposed it, when they would oppose it, the people who had to implement it, back to the people that you say you got to have. This guy's standing there. He finally just looks into the camera and says, "Well, what did you want me to do?"
Yeah.
Either I took this woman who was pregnant and took her to have a forced government abortion, or I was going to be put in jail or killed.
Exactly.
What did you want me to do?
So
what choice did I have?
So most
of course,
people,
we would say do the right thing, but that's easy to say when you didn't have weren't in that situation.
So what most people would do is they would just try to get by in life.
Right.
I mean that was
certainly saw that.
Was
right.
just
that
not
was,
cause attention. Just stay low. Don't look up.
It was
what you got to do.
It was the Russian way. In fact, my first trip to Moscow, it just hit me. Nobody made eye contact when you're walking down the street. Nobody smiled. Nobody, you didn't do that. Now, if you were in someone's home, it was a totally different atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It changed, but not in public, and it's not safe. It just isn't safe. Now they had some good jokes, because you just couldn't get anything.
And they drunk heavily.
Oh, well, of course, yeah. I mean,
that soothes a lot of ills, doesn't it?
That kind of
except the need for more to drink.
That kind of society would drive a Baptist to get a drink. But
I've always joked. I think that socialism is an easy sell to the uninformed masses.
Well, that was the point.
Because it sounds a lot like Santa Claus. It sounds like Christmas.
Right.
You're going to get all this for free, and you don't have to pay for it. Well, yeah, sign me up. I'm for that.
Well, and
I get gifts every day. That's great. But even like Bernie's plan, and this is where I don't get, people cannot see through this. He wants free education. Well, that's great. I'm going to get free education. So I get my education. I get out in the work world. Now my taxes are jacked up.
Right.
Because I got to pay for somebody else to get free education. So I still paid for an education.
Oh, yeah.
It just wasn't mine while I was there. Then I paid for it later for somebody else. So I still paid for it. It wasn't free.
No, nothing. Well, that's the first principle of all economics.
There is no free lunch.
There's no free lunch.
and that really is true.
Who coined that phrase, by the way? Man, that was a great pioneer in economics, wasn't it?
Yeah, I really don't know who coined it, but it's quite accurate. I mean, every choice we make carries with it a cost. I mean, that should be obvious because we live in a world. And we all have desires. We all have ends that we want to pursue, right? That we want to accomplish in our lives. And so to do that, you have to have the means, right? You have to have resources. You have to have economic goods. Well, there's only 4 ways you can acquire economic goods. You can produce it yourself. Well, that's kind of
difficult.
It's limited what you can do.
If I want to, if I want
make a birdhouse.
If I want a gallon of gasoline,
tough.
That's
tough to do in your basement.
That's going to be rough. I can produce something that's valuable to somebody else, and I can trade that. And for most of us, that's our labor services, and then trade that for what I want. I can steal it, take it from somebody else by force or fraud. This is what socialism is.
Right.
It's just systematic theft. That's all it is.
Legalized. Systematic theft.
Legalized theft. That's all it is. Right. So it violates the 8th commandment.
Right.
And at risk.
Right.
And then the last one is charity. Somebody out of their kindness of their heart could give it to me.
Picks me up.
And that's the only 4 that exist.
No, that's it. Now, neither the other 2, stealing and charity, both presuppose prior production. Mm-hmm. Right, I can't give anyone anything that I don't possess, and if I'm going to possess it, then I've had to participate in the productive activities to possess something, to trade for it. So you can't build economies on that. All economy is built on production and trade, even in the most dictatorial socialist setting, like North Korea. Without some production,
now, somebody got to make something.
Somebody's got to make something, right? And no matter how forced it is, somebody's got to make something. They don't make a lot of it, right? Because they're all starving pilgrims in North Korea. But that's the way it works. Now, the freer you are, and the more productive that individuals can be, then the wealthier you're going to be. And I think sometimes because we've overcome so much in America, people take that for granted.
Yeah.
And they just don't realize what it took to get where we are.
And people have paid a high price for that.
And they've been...
In a lot of different ways. I mean, we always think about military and people laying their life down, and that's certainly true. But also in business and...
Sure.
Families and being gone away from relationships. I mean, there's been a high price to get where we are.
Oh, absolutely. And because anybody even starting a business has to put up the resources, has to risk it in order to try to build something. When Obama says, you didn't build that, well, who are you? Right, what do you know about it? I mean, that's sort of...
Bloomberg, about farming. You just put seeds in the
ground.
Yeah,
you just put seeds in the
ground.
Well,
that was brilliant.
But do you think about this for a minute?
He's smarter than to say some of the things he said.
He ought to be.
Well, is he?
Yeah, he should be. Let me rephrase that.
And that's what I think is the view of the left, and we say this all the time, and we said today, when we just saw the Democratic debate last night while we're taping this of Rick and Bubba University. Whoever told these Democrats to raise their hand when they wanted to speak, that only added to the childlike view of the world that they have. And this is it. They seem, to your point, and I think that's why this education and this textbooks and the others that you have available, we have got to educate. I'm telling you, we now have adults that are looking to people who are looking to adults, and the adults themselves don't seem to know where things come from.
Oh, they really don't.
I heard this said before. Said the far left has a childlike mind. I want a pony, but I have no idea where ponies come from, what ponies cost, how much feed for the pony. Do I have to build a barn? Am I have to put fencing around an area? How much room does a pony need? What is the cost of a pony, and where does it come from? They have no idea. They don't know what it takes to make an MRI. They just complain about the price. They have no idea where an MRI comes from.
Oh, in most times they don't. They really have no clue. And so to come across, they have this presumption of expertise that they don't really possess and could not possess. And so here's one of the features of the marketplace I think most of these people don't understand. Market prices make a real difference to help us navigate through the world and coordinate what we want to do with what other people want to do in ways that are mutually beneficial for both of us. And so that's lost in the political system, because in their view, it's just like, well, y'all just need to vote for more taxes and we'll take care of it.
Sure, yeah.
Which is always the answer.
So tell us, we've only given about 4 more minutes, so tell us about boundarystone.org and what's available. I know you've got a new one coming that just came out in fall of 2019. Tell us what textbooks are available to the homeschooling community, the private school community. What are some that are available?
Okay, so we've been fleshing this out, and so right now we've redone our basic economics text, and we've tried to really make it more user-friendly for the homeschooler, as well as, I think, for teachers in the Christian schools. And so because one of the knocks we had is this is great content, but very difficult to use.
Got it.
Okay, it may be too high a level. So what we've done is we've tried to reorganize that data.
Lower it down for us a little bit, Doc.
And we've created an online course to pair with it. So now if you're a homeschooler and you can buy the book and the course as a package deal, there you go.
You're done. Turnkey.
You're done. It's turnkey. And we've also done that with our government. So we have American government book. Now, we haven't gotten our American government book in the form we want to get it to eventually, but we also have the online course. And the government book is actually being used pretty widely. Sunlight Curriculum has picked it up, and they use it in theirs. So that's out there. And then we have the 6-volume American History set. We've got to get that. We've got to develop out the online course to go with that.
But you do have the textbooks.
We have the textbooks, and we also have Western Civilization, and then we have the 2 kind of general books now, the Unmasking the Sacred Lies and the Great Utopian Delusion, both of which I think are great. If you want to understand the political elite and why they're pushed, then the Great Utopian Delusion, that's why we wrote it. And I wrote it so you didn't have to read Saul Alinsky's horrible little book, Rules for Radicals.
Yeah, that a lot of our friends on the left love.
They love it. I mean, but you open it up, it's dedicated to Satan. I mean,
that rules me out on the book right there. Right out of the
court. It kind of takes me out of it too. But I plowed through it to see what they're saying.
And, one of the things, and I'll say this in closing because I know we got to wrap up. It is amazing, and you made this point, especially with our elected officials, and I think it's probably an Achilles heel of democracy, one worth having, but still maybe a weak link in it that. We elect people to go to Congress, and they deal with massive amounts of money, massive topics from highways to dam building to rocket ships, and they don't know their butt from a hole in the ground. And I use AOC as an example. Okay, she was a bartender 2 years ago.
Right.
She's got a little economic degree from somewhere that nobody's ever heard of. I'm not sure if she went to class or not, but she's never run a lemonade stand. And she is trying to change the entire U.S. economy. And that should be bothersome to any of us.
Well, it worries me.
Well, we've got to know, too, like you said, what is our economy? You've got to know what it is to even know somebody's changing.
Yeah.
Here's the website, boundarystone.org. You can go there and find out all the information we just talked about. Dr. Paul Cleveland, boundarystone.org. Thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you guys for having me.
And thank you for being with us on this edition of Rick and Bubba University.